Round 3 of AFL action is in the books, and it was a round that unfortunately has been marred in controversy. Join me today as I unpack all the action from round 3, get my votes in for the MVP award, and reveal my team of the week. This is the round recap. What is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football, and today we turn our attention to the weekend that was round 3 of the 2026 home and away season, which unfortunately, as the intro alluded to, has been smeared and marred in controversy from certain games. We've got some clubs and players coming to boiling point. We have a situation going to the tribunal that we haven't seen in decades. We've got a lot to unpack. This was a weekend that, despite the fact that we've still got the buys going on and some teams missed out, it was action-packed. And it all kicked off on Thursday night at GMHBA Stadium, Geelong playing host to Adelaide. Obviously, Adelaide coming off of the loss to the Bulldogs at home the week prior, heading down to GMHBA Stadium is always going to be a tough ask. They haven't defeated Geelong in Geelong for many, many years, and this was primed for Geelong and the picking that we essentially thought that was going to go down. We had a feeling that these players were going to be able to kind of weave their way through Adelaide's makeup, especially given the fact that Adelaide have come into this game injury hampered. They've been struck pretty bad. We already know defensively, Mitchell Hinge, Mark Keane, out of that defensive structure. Heading into this game, no Jordan Dawson, no Rory Laird, arguably two of, if not their two best players. So their backs were against the wall. They were really up against it. But to come out of this game only 8 points behind, I think they did themselves incredibly well. But then on the same token, Geelong did some Geelong things and were a little bit inaccurate in front of goals. So this is a game that probably should have been put to bed by the tune of 30 points if we're being realistic. But unfortunately, Geelong couldn't stem that flow. A little bit of inaccuracy caused the doors to open a little bit for Adelaide. But Adelaide didn't drop off. And I feel this is the main draw to take away for Adelaide. They didn't drop off in a big way against the Bulldogs. They didn't drop off in a big way against Geelong. They obviously beat Collingwood 3 weeks prior. It's an interesting concept because during the course of these 3 games, regardless of outcome, the Adelaide fraternity have been pretty stalwart on talking about the umpiring and pointing finger at some adjudication that haven't gone their way that could probably have suggested maybe the outcome would have shifted. Now, I'm not a believer of that in certain situations. I do think that sometimes the umpires make decisions that do turn favour in momentum, but this game actually did have a few instances where the adjudication definitely swung momentum, especially so there was one moment that actually resulted in a Geelong goal that should have never been. That was the moment where the new out of bounds rule between the defensive 50 and forward 50, if it's by disposal, it's the lasso rule, and you get a disposal of like a free kick given to the opposition team that didn't touch the ball last. And in this instance, Tom Atkins was paid a free kick for lasso. He brought it back in real quickly, and it resulted in a very quick goal from Jack Martin up forward for Geelong. When in reality, the ball came off of Atkins, should have been an Adelaide free kick, and the lasso might have resulted in an Adelaide goal, which again, by the outcome, would have still seen them lose by 2 points, but that could have been a momentum shifter at that point in time. They could have gone on, hypothetically, to kick a couple more goals. I mean, in hindsight, we can sit here and we can judge and we can try to make assumptions. We don't know how it would have played out. But this failed because the ARC is able to look at these instances and overturn decision. We actually saw a decision later on in the weekend overturned during the Port Adelaide West Coast game, and I think that was probably prompted due to the fact that they fucked up here. At any rate, though, it's kind of baffling to me that we've got new systems in place and they want to adjudicate new rules, but we can't systematically put them in place properly. It's just a little bit frustrating as a neutral. Before this game, as I said, Geelong 8 points the victor. Breaking down the match timeline, at quarter time, Geelong led 4-4-28 to 2-2-14. At halftime, they led 6-5-41 to 5-3-33. At three-quarter time, they led 7-9-51 to 7-5-47, and the final scoreline saw them win 9-14-68, defeating 9-6-60. Definitely feel if they had a Jordan Dawson, a Rory Laird, the outcome would have changed. I definitely believe Adelaide could have and should have won this game if the circumstances were better fit for their situation. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get the job done. Having a look at the match report, I'm not entirely sure whether there was any injury out of this game, so we will quickly clarify. No injuries at all. Good news, especially given the carnage that we have seen in recent weeks. Breaking down the team stats, let's have a little bit of a look-see-loo to see where things landed and how things could have shifted accordingly in the opposite direction. I thought this was a great game of football to watch, and again, another Thursday night primetime slot where we've been given a solid performance. So far, we are yet to see a Thursday or a Friday, I feel, that has failed to live up to expectation. Disposals, 80 more the way of Geelong. They just absolutely ate it up around the contest. Again, losing a Jordan Dawson, losing a Rory Laird, I feel input in that situation is going to drop, because obviously Jordan's going to accumulate a fair bit of the ball. Rory Laird can accumulate a little bit of the ball. They've got to shift some magnets around because defensively they're a little bit shot. They only just won the handball game. It was the kicking game that they absolutely dominated. 50 plus kicks the way of Geelong. Inside 50s, they had 22 more, and they only managed to win by 8 points. That's why I'm saying we got a better return, I feel, from Adelaide in certain retrospects. I mean, inside 50 efficiency is down. I mean, they only had 35% inside efficiency because they had 45 entries for 60. But, I mean, what could have been and what should have been, especially given the fact that Adelaide were more clean with disposal efficiency around the ground. Again, there were 12 more free kicks paid to the way of Geelong. Use that as you may. That is why some Adelaide supporters are very disgruntled with umpiring this week. The stoppages, Adelaide actually won the hitouts, which is big because they're doing this on the back of McAndrew, who's come in for his first year, and he's absolutely flying. They've got an absolute gem with this guy, and I feel it's going to force Riley O'Brien out for quite some time. The clearance game only just went the way of Geelong. Stoppage clearance is where they absolutely got them, I feel, the better. I mean, they only had 3, but I think they were better around the stoppage than what Adelaide were. They were able to really maintain possession. It was uncontested possession where they got their ascendancy, Geelong. They had 51 more uncontested possessions. And again, when you look at the total marks they've taken around the ground, they had 98 playing 65. We know Geelong defensively like to slow momentum and get the ball on their terms. We, again, have seen 2 different styles of football this year. We have seen the teams that want to take the game on by the handball and get a quicker game going, and then we've got teams that want to slow momentum down, take the sting out of the game a little bit, and just be able to set up and get into their own routine. And we know Geelong defensively love to do that. They're happy to chip the ball around defensively, set up momentum on their own terms, let their midfielders go at it, and then decisively move the ball forward. Apart from that, that's pretty much the breakdown of the game. Geelong were just able to maintain that possession long enough to keep the ball on their terms and the game on their terms. But Adelaide, when they had the ball, some of their quicker work really opened Geelong up. So it's going to be a true battle this year to see what style is going to reign supreme. Is the quicker, chaotic style better? Is the slower, methodic method better? Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Personally, I like a more methodical approach, especially for somebody as a Richmond supporter like myself. Going into the forward line haphazard all the time is never going to work. So being able to be a little bit more methodical with ball movement, I think is going to reap more reward this year. But that just could be me. As for the individual performances, there were a couple that missed votes this week, which I will quickly touch on. I thought Brian Myers for Geelong had a solid enough outing. I thought Sean Manor had a solid enough outing. Josh Rochelle and Josh Worrell for Adelaide were very solid. Worrell was probably one of the better defensive efforts over the course of the weekend. But the three that I've landed on for votes out of this game, I think definitively were Geelong's best three when talking about impact. The one vote I gave to Tom Stewart. Defensive game was absolutely incredible. He got back to his best, and I feel we've been in a little bit of a lull with him over recent weeks, maybe even recent months, when collectively looking at his work. We know what he can do at his best, and I feel he dropped off a little bit over the course, but he's got back to his best in this game. 24 disposals, 8 of which were contested, 6 marks, 4 tackles, 1 clearance, 632 metres gained, 1 goal, and 3 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Max Holmes. He's looking early on as another All-Australian favourite here. His work rate is absolutely incredible. His outside run is critical to Geelong's success, and whenever he gets the ball, more often than not, you know he's going to do something good with it. He had 27 disposals, 11 contested, 5 marks, 5 tackles, 2 clearances, 603 metres gained, 1 goal, and 7 score involvements. And best on ground for me was Bailey Smith. Again, a player who has wavered a little bit in his consistency, but he started the year off hot, I feel, and showing here what he's truly capable of, and his defensive efforts in this game I thought were absolutely huge, which is something we don't really highlight often enough with Bailey Smith, because we don't get the chance to talk about it all too much, because defensive efforts sometimes are a little bit lacking. He sometimes can be a little bit too one-sided in the way of only being offensive, but he had both going in this particular outing. 40 disposals, 16 were contested, 2 marks, 10 tackles, 6 clearances, 795 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 5 score involvements. Geelong showing that at their best they are still capable of playing the best brand of football, and they had an even enough spread in this game to show they don't need to rely on certain players to stand tall. I mean, Mark Blixav's found some ascendancy in this game. Oliver Dempsey had a huge game. Connor O'Sullivan in defence played well. Atkins in the middle played well. Sam De Koning had a good game. Jack Martin kicked 3 up forward. So, again, an even spread was very good to see. But unfortunately for Adelaide, when you look at the top-rated players on the field, you break down the top 10, and only three players from Adelaide managed to break into the top 10. Of the top 20, they had a further maybe 5. So, you know, out of the top 20 players on the field, only 8 or 9 of them came from Adelaide, and convincingly, by a long way, Geelong's players were significantly better on the outing. So, do with that as you will. Feel free to blame umpire adjudication. There were definitely some issues in this game that could have turned momentum, but I don't think we can sit here and definitively say the umpiring cost this game. They had opportunities. Geelong had more opportunity to put this game to bed in a much bigger way, especially when you have a look at the breakdown of this game and when they scored their behinds. They scored 9 of those in the second half, when Adelaide only kicked 3 behinds but went on to kick only 4 goals. So do with that as you will. The fact that Geelong have come out in the second half, pretty much butchered all their opportunity. They kicked 3 goals 9 for the term, like for the second half, only seeing 4 goals 3 kicked from Adelaide. It, again, I said, should have been 30 points plus the way of Geelong. Adelaide sticking in firm, though. I don't think this is enough to write Adelaide off. They're being competitive enough once they get players back in. The likes of Mark Keane, Jordan Dawson, Rory Laird, Mitchell Hinge. These are game-changing players that they are missing, so they'll get things back on their terms. As for Geelong, they continue to just do Geelong things. They get the ball in hand, they win games. It's hard to ever write Geelong off, truly. So they pick up a much-needed win. Adelaide may be licking their wounds a little bit, back-to-back losses against some contending teams, but the fact that they kept in touch, I don't think we write them off completely just yet. Friday night saw Collingwood host GWS at Marvel Stadium. Yeah, the Richmond effect. Hosting a game at Marvel, having to travel down the road, it's kind of a laughable concept whenever this goes down, but Collingwood don't often find themselves at Marvel Stadium. So this was an interesting prospect. This was a Collingwood that were a little bit out of their depth in way of location. This is a GWS team that has shown very little defensive effort in the way of their midfield core and have allowed some teams to run absolutely rampant. And that's exactly what happened in this game outside of the first quarter. The first quarter was rather competitive for most of it, and Collingwood found some ascendancy late, but then after that, minus a toss and turn battle heading into half-time, it was then all the way of Collingwood, and it was very convincingly all the way of Collingwood as well. In the first term, they led GWS 5-1-31 to 2-5-17, and then at half-time, only managing 1-2 for the term, went in with a very slight lead, 6-3-39, playing 4-6-30. Then after that, the floodgates opened. 9-5-59 led 5-10-40, with the final score being 13-9-87, playing 7-12-54. Not going to say alarm bells for GWS just yet, but with that being said, there's a common trend going through with them, and if they don't tighten the screws, they're going to get opened up almost every week. There were a few injuries to come out of this game, probably more so structurally for Collingwood, but GWS lost Angwin to an eardrum injury, and Callaghan sustained a dislocated finger. For Collingwood, however, Scott Pendlebury, chasing down the game record, finished the game with Achilles tightness and then ended up setting him out for the rest of the game. With a 6-day turnaround, he will probably miss this upcoming weekend. And Darcy Moore comes back in for his first game of the year, does a hamstring, low grade, so it's only about 4 weeks, but I think they said he's got bursitis in his knee as well. So again, I questioned in the moment whether they should have sent him back out onto the field after they checked him in the rooms. I thought he was moving way too stiff. You could tell he had either a knee or a hamstring related injury going on. Might have saved himself the trouble had he have just sat on the bench. Maybe they brought him in a little bit too soon as well. But they're going to rue that decision. Another 4 weeks out. Thankfully, Howe got through the game unscathed. We still have Josh Dacos playing well defensively, Isaac Quaynor, Dan Houston, Perryman Evans. So as a defensive unit, they have people there to perform. But it's also just the fact that their captain comes back in. They've lost him. It's a bit of a rough roller coaster that Collingwood are currently riding in the way of injury. But Bobby Hill is back as well. That was a big thing coming into this week. I don't know how long it will be until he gets game time, but at least he's now back at the club. And I've got some opinions about that, but obviously mental health isn't something we should openly joke about. It is something very serious. So despite situations that he maybe have caused himself, we can't really, harshly judge somebody when something like mental health comes into the picture. Looking around the ground, this is where things get interesting because GWS absolutely dominated disposal by the way of 62. They only had a handful more kicks. They actually only had 14 more kicks collectively, but around the ground they had 48 more handballs. We know GWS love the handball game. They love trying to roll that orange tsunami from half back forward. But they found themselves in positions where they were turning the ball more often than not. They had more inside 50s by 8. They were more effective around the ground. Inside 50s, though, they were efficient by less than 5%. Adjudication of the game, free kick-wise, was quite even, 16 playing 12. Hitouts, Collingwood dominated, and it wasn't on the back of Darcy Cameron. It was on the back of a debutant in Oscar Steen. He got first use, and the fact that now this ruck work includes having to jump at the contest, he found a lot of ascendancy around the ground. He's got a great leap. He was getting first use to it. There was one play that was absolutely sublime. He jumped up, tapped it straight down the throat of a midfielder, and they got an inside 50 mark straight away. These are the opportunities that we love seeing as neutral supporters. As Collingwood supporters, they should be in raptures right now with this kid. He has waited 4 years for a debut, and he absolutely dominated the ruck game. So much so that Darcy Cameron was secondary when it came to the output from ruckman on the field for Collingwood. Collingwood had 2 more clearances around the ground. They did lose the stoppage clearance, though. It was the centre clearance where they found a bit of ascendancy, which was good to see. Possession, again, uncontested possessions. GWS dominated that by over 70. Huge. Turnovers were pretty even, but again, it was the turnovers from GWS with all the extra disposal they had where they got eaten up. As soon as the ball spilled out due to turnover, Collingwood capitalised. Both played a very structured game as well. GWS had 20 more marks around the field, and we know, even though they love the handball game, they're one of those teams that love to set up first and then they get the ball rolling, and that's exactly what they tried to do. And more often than not, when trying to get that momentum shifting, Collingwood were able to cut it off at the pass, and that is what killed GWS in this game. They had the game, they had plenty more ball in hand. They were just not able to do anything with it. Collingwood were able to shut things down, get things on their own terms like they have. So much so, GWS never led at any point during this game. Not once. Which blows my mind, because on paper, you could argue that around the ground collectively, GWS are more comprehensively built than Collingwood. Not knocking Collingwood at all, but forward half of the ball, Collingwood are lacking. They've got Dan McStay, they've got Membry. McStay has little to no impact in this game, I feel. Membry pops off the chain. Elliott didn't really have much ascendancy in this game. I don't know, they just find a way, Collingwood. They just found a way to get it done. It just blows my mind that what has let GWS down the most over the course of the opening rounds is they're paying no mind to midfield, midfield defensive efforts. They're just letting it, like, when you look at the breakdown here of tackles around the ground, for example, all the tackle leaders are from Collingwood. Callaghan lays 4. Outside of that, it's all forwards. Clayton Oliver lays 2 tackles. And then after that, you've got nothing. There's so many, I don't understand. GWS are just allowing way too much room. They're probably awaiting the return of some very key important players. I feel Toby Bedford back in this team obviously takes them to a new level because he's able to run a shutdown role. But again, when you look at the midfield numbers for some of these players, Dacos has 36. Sidebottom has 31. Jack Crisp in rotation has 26. Then you have, let's work down a little bit and see some other efforts here. Lipinski has 16 as an outsider. DeGoey has 16. There are some efforts here that are a little bit lower on the effort side of things. I mean, Pendlebury was out for a portion of the game. He only had 10. How much did old mate... I can't see him. Where is he? Where is he? He had a good game and I wanted to highlight it. I thought he played exceptionally well. Anyway, did he not have many touches of the ball? Am I going crazy? I'm not seeing a... This is interesting. Have they not got him listed on the ground at all as playing? Bo McCreary played, right? I'm almost certain Bo McCreary played this game, and yet I'm looking at the stat distribution here on the AFL website. Oh, there he is. He had 14. The biggest issue with GWS, as we have a look at the player breakdown, is the defensive efforts and lack thereof of their midfield. I mean, defensively, looking at tackles, all the tackle getters here are pretty much either defensive efforts from GWS or they're all the way of Collingwood. I mean, Finn Callaghan lays 4, Clayton Oliver lays 2, and then outside of that, it's either forward tackles or defensive tackles. Ned Long lays 10, Schultz up forward lays 6, Dacos lays 5, Crisp lays 4, McCreary lays 3, Maynard lays 3, Dacos Josh variety lays 3, and then when you look at the disposal getters of the game, Dacos has 36, Sidebottom gets 31, Crisp has 26. They're paying no mind to these midfielders at all. I mean, Clayton Oliver has 37 in an effort that was very, I don't know. I really don't know. He has 37, Finn Callaghan has 35, and yet they can't find ascendancy out of that midfield core because they're happy to get the ball offensively and rack up the numbers, but defensively when the ball's turned over, everything just goes to the wayside. I really don't understand what's going on with this GWS core group. I'm lost for words. I really am. I don't know how many times they're going to allow a team to run over the top of them in the midfield, and as long as they keep allowing this to happen, teams are going to get ascendancy on them more often than not. For the votes in this game, I did land on 3 Collingwood players. I'm giving Steele Sidebottom the 1 vote. He had 31 disposals, 9 of which were contested, 11 marks, 4 clearances, 473 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. The 2 vote, off of halfback, I thought Josh Dacos was very critical in their use. 33 disposals, 3 of which were contested. I think we're just going to accept that the Dacos boys aren't going to get huge contested numbers each and every week, especially Josh, who is in a structure that is going to see a lot of uncontested ball, especially with the sideways and backwards kicking that they're doing to maintain possession and kind of get momentum back a little bit. He had 8 marks, 3 tackles, 662 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 5 score involvements, and I thought best on quite clearly was Nick Dacos. 36 disposals, 12 were contested, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 6 clearances, 770 metres gained, 1 goal, well 2 goals actually, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements. He was as pivotal to this game as any, could have kicked 3 or 4 goals actually if he was on song a little bit more. No surprise, when Collingwood's up and running, the Dacos boys are absolutely firing. And again, if you're able to shut down a Josh Dacos, a Nick Dacos, a Sidebottom, the game infinitely changes. But unfortunately, GWS have a lot to look at inwards and see what they can do structurally to get things on their terms, because unfortunately, nothing is going their way at the moment. I mean, Jesse Hogan has a very down game. I don't know whether he's carrying an injury or not. Toby Green's input has been well down. They've got to do something. They've got to hit reset and just come out firing, because they can't rely on a Oliver or a Callahan to rack up all these numbers and still get beaten convincingly around the contest. Collingwood, they get things done. They come off the break, they come back firing, they really set themselves up for a push. And I think still, even though forward half of the ball is very questionable for them, they've got enough around the contest to still keep things on their terms. So they're still very much one to watch when it comes to not only wildcard fixturing, but finishing in that top 6 configuration as well. Saturday kicked off at Marvel Stadium, and we're not going to dwell on this game all too much, because outside of a huge final term from Brisbane, this game was rather lackluster. It failed to deliver on many fronts. It was a game that finally saw Brisbane, the reigning premiers, win their first game of the year, which I think comes to a surprise to many, but we've seen them in recent years get a slow start and still finish off strong. So you can never question or doubt Brisbane's ability, but this win was very much needed. I feel if they lose this game, there is a morale drop around the club. They'll have their heads in their hands, but they got things on their terms in the way by 33 points in a game, as I said, especially in the opening term, one of the worst games I've seen in a very long time. I mean, St Kilda led 1 goal 7-13 to 5 behinds. Wild. Absolutely wild. After that point, Brisbane, especially in the second term, just managed to turn things around. Second half, rather, not second term, because obviously the second term was 39, St Kilda's way leading 31, 8 points the deficit, and then Brisbane come out in the second half, flip the switch, and get the ball rolling and really opened up St Kilda around the ground. They led St Kilda 10-8-68 to 9-12-66 at three-quarter time, and the final scoreline 17-11-113, defeating 11-14-80. In that second half, St Kilda went on to kick 6 goals 5. Brisbane went on to kick 13 goals 4. Huge, and none more so in that last term. That last term alone, St Kilda scored 2 goals 2. Brisbane went on to kick 7 goals 3. It was an absolute onslaught. They were coming home incredibly hard, and it just really starts to beg the question whether or not some of these recruits are living up to expectation for St Kilda, which we'll get into when it comes to the statistical breakdown of this game. In the way of injury, I don't think... No, there was injury. Cooper Sharman for St Kilda ended the game with concussion, as well as Answorth, because I think they clashed heads. So they will both obviously miss. And Gardner did a shoulder injury, which is going to see him sit out for some period of time. I think it's an AC joint injury, which is going to bench him for a while, which is kind of unfortunate. He's just come off of that 1 week suspension, and now they lose him to injury. This year's been very harsh with injury. Truly has. Last week it was all about hamstrings. This week it's all about structural damage, like Achilles tightness, hamstring again for Darcy Moore, an AC joint injury for Darcy Gardner, and it's not the only injuries that were sustained over the weekend. Looking at the breakdown of the team stats, Brisbane ended up winning the disposal count by 63. It was their kicking game, again, that was more dominant. 253 leading 207. We know that methodical approach with Brisbane is a lot better used, and we know they like to really try to hammer in those inside 50s a lot more precisely. They like to revert back a little bit defensively, not all the way back, but they'll try to chip out targets on those outer wings to start getting the ball flowing the way they want to get it. They were cleaner around the ground, much cleaner inside 50. I mean, they had lesser inside 50s than St Kilda did, but they were 61.5% efficient. St Kilda, for their 56, were 46%. Huge gap. Stoppage game, hit-outs. They absolutely monstered Brisbane by 20, but yet the clearances went the way of Brisbane 42-28. Absolutely huge. They were ending up in the end roving to Tom De Koning and Rowan Marshall. They were happy to read the ruckman's taps and get the clearance work going that way. Again, uncontested possession, they had 51 more, and that's what really opened up St Kilda. Getting that outside ball, slowing things down, reverting back to a Wilmot, to a Zorko, and then being able to pick out your hits all around the ground. And it was just so seamlessly done, especially in the second half. They were able to pick out their targets so seamlessly and without any repercussion defensively. They really just opened St Kilda up in a game where St Kilda were in it and just allowed things to absolutely break down. It was, again, in this game, St Kilda led for 61 minutes. Brisbane led for 65. It was a true arm wrestle back and forth, but that final term was Brisbane back at their best. If you ever were to question Brisbane's ability, they, in that last quarter, turned up the heat, and they showed that their best is arguably still the best in the competition. Feel free to disagree. The player stats for this game, again, collectively looking around the ground, Wangani Malira actually had a pretty decent game. He had 29 disposals. I don't know. There was a couple of instances where he really wanted to take the game on, and what is really kind of irking me, not just with Nasiah, but there's a few players in the competition that whenever they touch the ball, commentary teams absolutely start creaming their pants. I mean, Nick Dacos, obviously, I think he's earned that rap. Nasiah coming into this year off of this $2 million contractor season that he's signed, I feel he is getting glazed more than he should, because I still feel he is in that transitional process where he needs to prove his worth. This game was a great outing for him. Could he have been a little bit more effective around the ground? Maybe, but this is where he shows effort enough to quantify the discussion. Jack Sinclair again off of halfback was huge. I think he's putting his hand up for an All-Australian this year early. Cal Wilkie again, an absolute wall defensively, but outside of that, it is all Brisbane. Outside of the three I chose for the votes, Josh Dunkley had a big game. Levi Ashcroft had a solid game. Ryan Lester defensively was huge. Wilmot was a wall defensively as well. Took 9 marks for the game, which was amongst some of the most amount of marks taken by any player. I'm envious of that kid. I would love a Darcy Wilmot at Richmond. His interceptability, his IQ, absolutely great for a youngster. The 3 that I landed on for votes in this game, though, are very hard to question. Maybe the 2 and 3 could be flipped, but these 3 guys, especially in that final term when the game turned on its head, I feel were some of the most critical on the field. The 1 vote I gave to Dane Zorko, again, very underrated in that defensive lineup. A lot of people assumed Kitty Coleman coming back in would shift his output in the middle. Absolutely has not. He had 28 disposals, 9 of which were contested, 3 marks, 2 tackles, 3 clearances, 732 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 5 score involvements. The 2 vote I landed on Jared Berry. Within this midfield lineup, when you look at a Lachie Neale, when you look at a Hugh McCluggage, when you look at a Josh Dunkley, Will Ashcroft, a Levi Ashcroft even, I feel Jared Berry is the one not spoken about enough. We know his heroics heading into last grand final, where he sacrificed himself for the greater good of the team. He dislocated his shoulder in the game prior. He could have probably played in the grand final, but he decided to sit out. And in the end, Chris Fagan awarded him his, grand final premiership medallion, which again is a great gesture. But Jared Berry's work rate in this midfield is so underrated. 31 disposals, 6 were contested, 10 marks, 3 tackles, 2 clearances, 600 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, and 7 score involvements. Best on ground, I thought, though, was Will Ashcroft. He absolutely opened up St Kilda's midfield. And the clearance game, there was none better than him on the day. 31 disposals, 11 were contested, 5 marks, 7 tackles, 10 clearances, 254 metres gained, 3 score involvements. St Kilda, we need to look at the recruits harshly, I feel, because the inability for them to have real, like, Liam Ryan kicks 3 goals. I think for a small forward, that's a great return. But outside of that, for the people that they have brought into this club this year, we need to see more. I mean, Jack Silvani only has 11 touches defensively. Going further down the list, Tom De Koning only has 11 disposals. I mean, he has 34 hitouts. He had a lot more hitouts than what Rowan Marshall did. But we're used to seeing a lot more around the contest from Tom De Koning. And we're not seeing that input here. It's really rough. There were some players as well for St Kilda that didn't have much input. Dan Butler had a very low input game. Alex Taru played as a key forward and only managed 3 touches for 1 goal. I don't know what's going on with St Kilda. I still think they very much are just a plan A, no plan B kind of team. When they get opened up, they revert back to pretty much having to do the same thing because they don't have anything to structurally shift into. For Brisbane, I feel this win not only was a must win, but getting it now under their belt really gets things back on their terms. They're 1 game away, I believe, from getting Harris Andrews back. They lose Gardner, which is going to sting, but I think defensively, structurally, they can set up without him. Harris Andrews coming back in is going to be the big lifter, and obviously now, with them winning their first game, players getting off the chain, players playing themselves back into form, they're going to be one to watch. Heading on over to Optus Stadium, Fremantle hosted Richmond in a game where, for a half of football, Richmond were actually incredibly competitive, and I was incredibly happy. Unfortunately, it was then all the way of Fremantle, and I think we all expected that drop-off. We all expected a 10-goal win. This could have been an absolute bloodbath. In reality, this should have been 150 points the way of Fremantle, and I'm not even sugarcoating that, because to finish the game with 25 behinds, absolutely wild. They had... what's that? They had 38 scores registered. Of those 38, 25 were behinds. I think Richmond are lucky that this didn't blow out to a much bigger win, but it was still the way of 60 points in the way of Fremantle, 10 goals, and as much as I would love to take a lot out of this game, there was a lot to take out of this game, don't get me wrong, but that second half was just so one-sided that it was almost unbearable to point as a Richmond supporter. The first half, though, I'm absolutely wrapped. To be only a goal behind at half-time, and some of the efforts we saw up until that point were great to see. But, as much as I expected late game fade-outs and big blowouts, it's still disheartening as a fan, especially to see some efforts outweighed by scoreboard impact, unfortunately. The first quarter saw Fremantle 1 goal 5-11 lead 3 behinds 3, very similar to the game prior at Marvel Stadium. At halftime, however, Fremantle 5-9-39 led Richmond 5-3-33. After that, Richmond only managed, unfortunately, 1 goal 4 for the rest of the game, and Fremantle went on to register 8 goals, 16. Massive. Three-quarter time was 10-18, 78, leading 5-4, 34. And full time was 13-25, 103, defeating Richmond 6-7, 43. Now, coming into this game, no Toby Nankervis, no Tom Lynch. And despite the rhetoric around Tom Lynch not winning the game for Richmond in round 1, which again we can point finger at, structurally he's just way too big to Richmond's forward line, and you could see that exposure kind of happen in that second half. Jasper Alger came in for his first game after a 5-goal haul in the VFL and has done a knee injury, which is going to see him out for a period of time, which is incredibly disheartening, especially as a young kid who was being rewarded for effort and unfortunately leaves the game absolutely destroyed for him. Just can't take a trick. We get these young kids and we're trying to get opportunity into these kids. We're trying to get game time into these kids, and it's the young kids that are getting hit with all these injuries more so than not. I mean, Smiley, Houghton, Cumming, I would love to be seeing them all get game time, but unfortunately all dealing with injury. This game up until half-time was very interesting because obviously no Toby Nankervis, so they should have dominated the ruck game, dominated the clearance. But at half-time, even though they had dominated the ruck game, Richmond was winning the clearance. We were doing effectively what Brisbane were doing to St Kilda the game prior. We were reading the tap work of Luke Jackson and Sean Darcy, and we were roving to their ruckman, and it was working. But everything in that second half just dropped off, and they just got ascendancy in every spot around the ground. I mean, 406 disposals to lead 314. They had 60 more kicks around the ground. They had 32 more handballs. They had 65 forward entries to 36. We were only 41% efficient inside 50. They were 61%. Around the ground, they only had 5% more disposal efficiency effectively. So, in that retrospect, we matched them. Stoppage work, again, 57 hitouts to 9. We got killed. We had Makaiti Lafau and we had Campbell Gray doing our ruck work. Two guys that aren't going to be number 1, not even number 2, maybe not even number 3 ruck selections. So, again, I'm still happy when you look at the clearance breakdown, 41 to 26. You look at that and you're like, oh, they got beaten comprehensively. But to have 26 clearances with only 9 hitouts your way, I think we take that as a win. Slightly. Contested work, they had well more, 151 to 118. Uncontested possessions, they cleared us by almost 70. It was just, it turned into a second half dominance. I think what would have happened at halftime is they would have gone into the rooms, they would have had a really hard look at themselves, and then they hit reset. Whereas with Richmond, key components missing, some senior players maybe not living up to expectation, and the drop-off was just too severe. And we'll point fingers as much as we can momentarily, but it was a rough watch in that second half. I love my boys. I bleed yellow and black, but boy, it was hard. I mean, having a look at some of the lack of defensive efforts here, I feel Noah Bolter, even though he's coming back into, playing full-time again, was a little bit down on input. Ben Miller tried hard, but only took 2 marks. We're used to seeing a lot more from him. Where was the effort for? No, we didn't take Nathan Broad over. Nathan Broad, I think, could have been well used in this game. There were some Richmond efforts that were very great. I mean, Tim Taranto played up forward, kicked a couple of goals, had 24, laid 10 tackles. Was in argument for maybe 1 vote for me for this game, but I couldn't justify that in a 10-goal loss. Luke Traynor comes back in. He has 28 disposals defensively, 9 marks. I thought he was one of our best. Jaden Short getting back to some of his best, 10 marks, 20 disposals. Nick Vlosten was serviceable enough, but outside of that, unfortunately, there was some letdowns. I mean, Jacob Hopper missed the turnover himself. I don't know what's going on with him. I really don't know. There's some players that I feel Uze needs to be harsh with and needs to swing the axe. Even though we've had some injuries force players out, I think in name of the rebuild that we're doing, we need to make some harsh decisions. And if there are players that aren't living up to expectation, time to give opportunity elsewhere. So it's no surprise when it comes to the 3-2-1. I've gone all the way of Fremantle here. For the one vote, I've given it to Shea Bolton. 33 disposals, 11 contested, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 4 clearances, 573 metres gained, 2 goal assists, and 7 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Josh Tracy absolutely destroyed us up forward. 16 disposals, 8 were contested, 12 marks, 2 tackles, 1 clearance, 335 metres gained, 4 goals, 1 goal assist, and 11 score involvements. And best on ground, chewed us up in that centre line. It was Caleb Sarong. 2 disposals, 15 contested, 2 marks, 6 tackles, 9 clearances, 579 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, 12 score involvements. This, again, could have been, should have been a much bigger win. And in the scope of the ladder overall, I've said it a few times and I'll say it again, these are wins that Fremantle need to absolutely destroy percentage, because I do feel with the wild card from 7 to 10 now being introduced, percentage is going to separate so many teams, and you don't want to be one of those teams that falls the wayside of 7th to 10th and get knocked out before you get the chance to go for a premiership tilt. It's going to be interesting to see where they go, because again, on paper, I feel Fremantle have one of the best teams in the comp, but their consistency is way too lacking. For Richmond, as a Richmond man, I applaud the first half effort, and even in the second half, there were some efforts that are worth noting, but I think collectively, there needs to be some looking inward at some certain players, and I think it's time to be a little bit more heavy-handed when it comes to selection. I don't know whether I'm being a little bit too harsh, but there are definitely some players that are hanging on, I feel, by the edge of their teeth on effort, and it's about time Uze made those positions be fought for instead of giving them consistently to players who are failing to deliver. The final game on Saturday night, Essendon, North Melbourne, Marvel Stadium. This could have gone one or two ways. Either Essendon rocks up wanting to play football and takes opportunity against a North Melbourne team that failed to deliver against West Coast the week prior, or North Melbourne rock up with a fire in their belly and bounce back after that loss to West Coast. And that's exactly what happened. Apart from 2 instances in this game where Essendon managed to hit the front, it was all the way of North Melbourne, and I think the score line at the end of this game was quite flattering in the way of Essendon. Quarter time, North Melbourne led 3-2 20 to 2-5 17. Half time, they led 7-2 44 to 4-8 32. 3/4 time was 12-6 78, leading 5-12 42, and the final scoreline was 12-9 81, defeating 9-15 69. That final quarter did see Essendon go on to kick 4 goals 3, and North Melbourne only managing to register 3 behinds. So a little bit of a late charge from Essendon, but it was too little too late. North Melbourne had already done the damage. Holy shit. The damage was done late in that third term, and I think they took their foot off the gas a little bit. That isn't the big talking point, though. We will get to that momentarily. Looking at the match report, just need to refresh my memory as to whether or not there were some injuries sustained in this game. There were not, but there was something caused by injury that has been the biggest talking point out of this entire weekend. There was a errant forearm or shoulder that struck Tristan Cherry, the ruckman from North Melbourne. Blood nose. Like, obviously no broken nose or anything, but it was bleeding. Now, there was an instance where Andrew McGrath come and a scuffle happened, like a big group formed. Tristan Cherry gets his jumper pulled by McGrath, gets pulled in, and they start pushing and shoving and doing what AFL players do in a scuffle. But what Tristan Cherry has done, and there's a lot of grey area here, and I'm going to put my thoughts forward. Some people might disagree and absolutely roast me in the comments here, so I'd love to know your thoughts on this entire situation. But essentially what Tristan Cherry has done in the eyes of the AFL and the media, and I'll say that because my take's a little bit different. Tristan Cherry's done this to his nose and then grabbed McGrath on the jaw, and essentially what the AFL is saying is he's wiped his own blood on McGrath. Now, he's been sent straight to the tribunal. Normally, in that instance, I think the tribunal is only directly referred to if it's going to be 3+ weeks, which I think is a bit harsh, considering 20-odd years ago, Nathan Buckley did something similar to Cameron Ling by wiping his blood on his jumper, and he got 1 week. Now, I know wiping blood on a player is disgusting. Absolutely feral thing to think of and concept. But I feel there's a lot of grey area here, and that's what I want to discuss. I feel, for one, when Tristan Xerri wiped his nose, he did it twice, actually. He did that action twice. He looked at his hand, did it again, looked at his hand, and then grabbed McGrath. Now, some people are arguing you can see blood on McGrath's face. I argue you can't. I think what Tristan Xerri's argument can be based on to start with, he wiped his nose, he saw there was no blood, he then grabbed McGrath, not to wipe blood, but to get in his face. And it's almost like a grabbing him and saying, you know, you fucking did this, you know what I mean? Like getting into his face kind of thing, instead of trying to wipe blood. If you were going to wipe blood, you wouldn't do it on a guy's face. I think you'd try to wipe it on their jumper instead. In the heat of the moment, maybe Tristan Xerri's done something fucking stupid, right? But there's a lot of grey here, as I said. Obviously, in this scuffle, and I'll show an image on screen, there is an umpire right behind Tristan Xerri this entire time. Blood rule is not called once. He then goes to a centre clearance right after this instance. The umpire there doesn't call the blood rule. Actually, so much so, there is no blood rule called at all. Not just for Tristan Xerri, but if there is blood seen on a player, they're going to call it anyway. Now, you could say, oh, they didn't call it because it wasn't free-flowing. If they see blood coming out of a guy's nose, they're going to call it. And they do that all the time when the instances have occurred that way. Andrew McGrath as well, in this instance, he gets his face, like, grabbed. If he had blood put on him, why wasn't A, any remonstration? He didn't like go, oh, you fucking put blood on me and get back into Xerri. He didn't make the umpire aware, and I feel that if you're going to have blood smeared on you, the first thing you're doing is showing the umpire what's been done. He didn't call a water boy over or a water carrier over to say, give me some water, I need to wash my face. There's a lot of grey. There is a lot of grey. Now, you can argue, and I do fully agree, yes, if blood was involved, he needs to get sanctioned. Is it worth 4+ weeks? I don't know. If it was 1 week 20 years ago, and we haven't seen something like this before, do you come out and try to make an example? I'm not entirely sure. I really don't know. But in this case, it's really rough. It's really hard to kind of work out what's going to happen here. Again, I still feel there's argument. Like, some people are saying even if it wasn't blood and it was like snot or something like that, then it's still equally as disgusting. I still argue as well, and I still bring up, in a post-COVID era now, people agree with COVID, don't agree with COVID, but I still think if we're questioning wiping snot on somebody or saliva, we still see players spitting in their hands and putting it all over the football when they're lining up for goals. So, like, they you know what I mean? Like, there's transferal of bodily fluids and shit, like sweat and saliva and everything in between. I just feel this instance here has been beat up by the media more than it should have. I feel trial by media is still very much a thing, and until a tribunal hearing has been held, I feel the media shouldn't have much sway on what's going on, because if Tristan Xerri in fact didn't wipe blood on McGrath, the damage is already done, because even Andrew Dillon has come out and said this hearing is happening tonight, which at the time of recording is tonight, because Good Friday is coming up and North Melbourne are due to play in that Friday fixture. So obviously they want to get this done out of the way as soon as they can, but even he turned around and said, we're hearing it tonight, and he referenced wiping blood on a player. I still question whether we actually saw blood or not. We never see blood on Tristan Xerri's hand. Maybe something on McGrath's face, but can you question that he's shading? Could that be dirt? I don't even fucking know, but very interesting to watch how this is handled. As I said, in 2002, Buckley was suspended for 1 week for wiping his blood on a jumper. How do they handle this moving forward? I don't know. It's blown up the AFL over the course of the weekend, and stupid again by Xerri if this is the case. Team stats for this game. Let's have a quick little look-see-loo and a breakdown. Again, this was very borderline unwatchable by certain retrospect. Very much a lot of ineffective ball use, a lot of turnover. They lose by 12 points, Essendon, but they had more inside 50s. They got dominated in the disposal count, 405 to 328. They had one more handball, but it was the work rate with the kicks. They had almost 80 kicks. Hit-outs went the way of Essendon, which I've got to give Blackiston his just desserts. He took Cherry to town in the way of ruck work. But again, they might have had better ruck work, but North Melbourne had 10 more clearances for the game. Uncontested possession, they had more than 60. And they had 61, in fact. And had more uncontested possession, had 10 more turnovers than Essendon, but again, were able to just get the ball on their terms and shut Essendon down. I mean, the marks. They had 53 more marks collectively around the ground. North Melbourne were happy to take the sting out of the game, and when it counted the most, that's what set up that onslaught heading into the end of the third quarter. They were able to just maintain possession, hit targets around the contest, and really just suck the sting out of the game. In a game that they were able to wrestle all that momentum so big. And as I said, the game was just done and dusted by the point of that third term and just getting that big gap. They were able to take their foot off the gas and only score 3 behinds, but it was still enough to convincingly win this game. As I said, the scoreboard, I think, is incredibly flattering, even though Essendon had opportunity. They kicked 9 goals, 15. North Melbourne, I still think, collectively around the ground played better football. And I mean, they had dominance with disposal. They had dominance with uncontested possession. They took plenty more marks around the contest. Yeah, as I said, they had 70 more marks for the 3-2-1 in this game, quite convincingly the way of North Melbourne for the 3-2-1. In fact, the 3-2-1 I've handed out are the 3 highest rated players on the field. A couple that were probably a little bit stiff. Colby McKercher, Tom Powell, I thought played well enough. I also considered Finn O'Sullivan here. Managed to have 24 disposals himself, but kept... where is he? Looking at his stats. He kept Zach Merritt to 10 disposals for the game, which is his lowest output in many years. So much so that Stevie Johnson on Triple M Radio has revealed that he has it on good source that post-game, after most players had already gotten into their gear, they had their post-game meeting, they had gone home, Zach Merritt was still in the change rooms lamenting on the outcome in his uniform. And I don't know whether this is writing on the wall. He'll reject this extension that Essendon have given him. He'll fuck off at the end of the year. I think he's done. He's gone. He's had enough. He's resigned himself to, I don't want to say sulking, but I mean, if he's in the rooms contemplating what the fuck is going on, then I think they've come to a pass where things need to change. And I think it starts at the top. Brad Scott needs to go. And I know many Essendon supporters, including a very close friend of mine, who is as one-eyed an Essendon supporter as you will ever find, wants Brad Scott gone immediately. And I don't think Essendon will take a forward step with Brad Scott still at the helm. However, as I said, 3-2-1, the way of North Melbourne. The one vote I landed on Luke Davies-Uniacke. I thought his inside work was great for North Melbourne. He had 31 disposals, 11 were contested, 11 marks, 4 tackles, 4 clearances, 306 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements. Now, the mark count for the 3 players that I'm going to nominate for votes here will speak volumes to how this midfield core for North Melbourne used the ball and slowed down play. Luke Parker's move to half-back has been a stroke of genius by Alistair Clarkson. His ball use is great, and he has really turned things on its head at North Melbourne. We thought maybe Colby McKercher would have this half-back role, but Luke Parker going back here frees up McKercher to run more freely around the ground, which is a clever masterstroke move. Luke Parker had 33 disposals, 8 were contested, 13 marks, 3 tackles, 337 metres gained, and 4 score involvements. He was one of those kind of rotating players that would have the ball move to him so they can get that lateral press going. And again, with someone like Luke Parker, who's very clean with disposal, very smart move. Best on ground for me was Harry Sheezel. 33 disposals, 9 were contested, 11 marks, 5 tackles, 365 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. It was a very comprehensive beatdown around the contest in that midfield. As I said, when you look at the counts here, Sheezel had 33, Davies-Uniacke had 31, Colby McKercher had 35 on the outside, Tom Powell had 23 but had 13 marks, Finn O'Sullivan had 24, had 8 marks, 3 clearances, kept Zach Merritt to only 10 disposals. Dylan Stevens had 23 plus 7 marks. Jai Simpkin had 22, 7 marks. As comprehensive a beatdown as you'll see. I mean, Darcy Parish had 19 possessions. Outside of that, did nothing. Merritt had 10 possessions. Outside of that, did nothing. And then further down, you look at all the other people in the midfield that did nothing. And Sam Durham only laid 1 tackle. He's normally a tackling machine. Unreal. The breakdown is absolutely incredible. I don't understand. I really do not. Injuries, there were none. It's just insane. It really is. These are 2 clubs rebuilding that I think might have been eclipsed by another club by the end of this conversation that we're going to have today. But Essendon, it really comes to a point here where you question where their first win comes from. And in my close friend group, I'm obviously a Richmond supporter. I've got a friend who's an Essendon supporter. We've got a friend who's a West Coast supporter, Brisbane supporter. So the rhetoric is now who's going to get their first win, Essendon or Richmond. And a very harsh reality is both of them might not get their first win until the Dreamtime game, at which they will be fighting actively for their first win. I think Richmond a better place than Essendon. I'm trying to put my bias aside by saying that. I think we've seen better effort from Richmond collectively than Essendon. But things need to change at Essendon. There's senior players that aren't living up to expectation. There's young kids getting opportunity that aren't taking the bull by the horns. We've got a coach that I think the team has lost faith in. Things are falling apart. North Melbourne, though, get back on track and a big morale booster heading into Good Friday football this coming weekend. The upset of all upsets went down on Sunday at Adelaide Oval. Port Adelaide hosting West Coast in a game where a lot of people thought Port Adelaide would win quite convincingly. But Port Adelaide getting defeated by North Melbourne put a little bit of doubt in people's heads. And I actually said when doing my tipping, West Coast, I gave every opportunity to win this game. And at quarter time, even halfway through the second quarter, Port Adelaide looked like they weren't going to lose this game. But it was another game where West Coast dug deep. Back-to-back weeks where they have come back from a deficit not only to stem the flow, but to win the game. West Coast have picked up their second win for the season. They have already eclipsed their efforts from 2025 in a year that most had written them off saying they weren't going to win a game, and I was one of those people, and I have been very rudely reality checked, and I am infinitely impressed by what West Coast has done over the past 2 weeks. But let's have a look at the match timeline just to see how big of a flow West Coast were able to stem back. At quarter time, Port Adelaide led 5-5-35 to 2-1-13. Half time, 8-6-54 led 7-4-46. 3-quarter time, Eagles took the lead 11-10-76 leading 9-11-65, and the final score was 13-14-92 defeating Port Adelaide's 13-12-90. 2 points the way of West Coast. For the second half, West Coast went on to kick 6 goals. What is that? 6 goals, 10. Port Adelaide went on to kick 5 goals, 6. This was a game where both clubs had plenty of opportunity, and I personally believe, having watched the game, West Coast should have won this by at least 2 or 3 goals, because in the second half, they had plenty of opportunities that went astray, and they were by far the better team. It was as comprehensive a performance from West Coast in that second term that I have seen in a very long time. It was very impressive on the back of some incredible efforts from some young kids. Looking at this game, there were a couple of injuries, some that might structurally hurt Port Adelaide a little bit more moving forward. Radigalia went down with what looked like a knee injury, so that'll be determined. Elliot Yeo did a groin injury. Severity, I'm not too sure. Both offer a lot to their club, but I think structurally, losing Connor Rosé off of halfback, losing Radigalia from fullback, now puts a lot of onus on Alira to kind of do the intercept kind of key lockdown role on his own. Not much really in the way of assistance, given that Todd Marshall missed this week as well. Does Todd Marshall come back next week? If he does, slots into that Radigalia role quite well, because he has been moved to defence in that kind of intercepting role. But there were so many more players on that West Coast lineup that impressed me far more superiorly than what some Port Adelaide players did. And it was the same performers from Port Adelaide that got the job done. But West Coast just had, I feel, so many young kids step up in the moment. And we'll talk about that momentarily. Port Adelaide had almost everything go their way. They were more efficient around the ground. They had 40-odd more disposals around the ground. West Coast had 12 less inside 50s, but they were 64% efficient versus 46. Hit-outs went the way of Port Adelaide. Clearance was dominated in the second half by West Coast, especially stoppage clearance, where they defeated Port Adelaide by 16. Huge gap they put on. Possession, uncontested, went the way of Port Adelaide, but again, West Coast just with ball in hand. I mean, more marks by Port Adelaide. Everything where it counts the most went the way of Port Adelaide, but West Coast were able to seize opportunity, especially, as I said, their ascendancy in the clearance work in that second half truly set this win up, and it is on the back of a handful of players who will get votes, and some might be a little bit of be stiff to have missed out. Again, for this game, I turned to my West Coast supporting friend for assistance, because again, this is a game where West Coast have won, but I thought best on ground was Zach Butters, and I feel bad enough that in West Coast's win last week, I went the way of more North Melbourne players than West Coast, and didn't want to do that again this week. But even my friend turned around and said he thought Zach Butters, 83% efficient with the 30 that he had, the handful of score involvements he had, was probably best on, and I did land that way. But outside of Kane Farrell, Jace Burgoyne, Mitch Georgiades kicks 3, Jason Horne-Francis had a decent game. It was just efforts from West Coast that need to be highlighted. Willem Dersma had a very good game. Harley Reid, superb. Jack Graham was solid. Tom McCarthy was great. Waterman had kicked 4. Waterman stiff to miss votes off me kicking 4, especially that long bomb from like 65 metres out. That was huge. Flynn in the ruck was great. Liam Baker was solid enough. The one kid I want to highlight the most is... Where is he? Where are you hiding in the stat sheet? Job Shanahan. He took 6 marks on the day, and some people might think, as a key forward, 6 marks isn't much. In that second half, most of those marks for him came in the defensive half of the ground, and none more bigger than the contested grab he took in the dying moments of the game. For a young kid in his second year, to take a pack grab like that when the game is on the line is absolutely huge. And this kid, whether he continues to play as a key forward, whether structurally he gets thrown in defence, I've actually seen some West Coast supporters suggest maybe shifting him to centre half back and trying to trial him in that role. He has hands as strong as a Jeremy McGovern, as a Shannon Hearn, as a Darren Glass. These are the types of West Coast players he's reminding me of with his marking ability. And even though drafted as a key forward, I feel there is prospect to maybe have him as that centre half back. He's tall, can mark the ball, clean with disposal, he's got a great head on him. Future is looking bright at West Coast, and now the conversation turns to whether or not their rebuild has leapfrogged Essendon, Carlton, has it caught up or even surpassed North Melbourne. Conversation needs to be had, I feel. However, the 3-2-1 for this particular week, I've already highlighted one of the players, which we'll get to momentarily. I gave the 1 vote to Tim Kelly, and I thought his work in the second half, especially his clearance work, was very pivotal to West Coast winning this game. 23 disposals, 13 were contested, 2 marks, 2 tackles, 7 clearances, 312 metres gained, 2 goal assists, 10 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Harley Reid, who is arguably on the day West Coast's best. 21 disposals, 8 were contested, 3 marks, 2 tackles, 6 clearances, 522 metres gained, 2 goals, and 9 score involvements. I think hitting the scoreboard himself and being a little bit more efficient with ball in hand puts him ahead of Tim Kelly, but these 2, pivotal. Even more so, you could argue, were the most critical in getting this game on West Coast terms. Best on ground, though, as I argued, Zach Butters, and I think, looking at the stats, it speaks for itself. 30 disposals, 14 were contested, 1 mark, 1 tackle, 6 clearances, 542 metres gained, 11 score involvements. The most contested possessions on the field, the most score involvements on the field, second equal clearances on the field. In a losing game by 2, I think you can justify it is okay for a 3 vote here. But as much as Zach Butters tried, West Coast were just so superior. And it is the first time we have seen West Coast this far up the ladder in many, many years. And you could now argue West Coast now have themselves in a position, back-to-back wins. Momentum is a serious thing. Can they carry this momentum into the following week of football? They are now an interesting watch. They are playing good football. They got beaten by Gold Coast convincingly 3 weeks ago, but they were still solid around the contest. This is a great watch. As a neutral supporter, as a supporter that is watching a rebuild with their own club, to see a rebuilding club get success like this is so incredible, and I cannot be happier for West Coast. Port Adelaide, though, when you look on paper, have one of the easiest runs for the first 10 weeks, and they have fumbled to North Melbourne and West Coast. Questions are to be had, I feel, definitely. The final game of the round saw Carlton hosting Melbourne at the MCG. Tom McDonald playing a milestone game. I can't remember how many games he's played, but none bigger than 250 being played by Max Gawn, who is in the conversation as being the best ruckman of all time. And this game had theatre written all over it. And you know, heading into this game, Carlton have struggled in second halves, not only this year, but collectively over the last 18 months. I think there's a stat where of their last 23 games, they have led at halftime in 18 of those. And of those 18 leads at halftime, they've gone on to win 10 games. So the fade out is real. And that's exactly what happened in this game. Carlton got up to as big as a 43-point lead and lost this game by 23 points in a 10-goal turnaround. Match timeline speaks volumes here, because this was history-making in many retrospects. Quarter time, Carlton led 6-2-38 to 1 behind. At halftime, they led 7-4-46 to 1 goal 6. Up until that goal was kicked, Melbourne were looking at a goalless first half, which is, I think, the first time since 1984 playing against Carlton that would have happened, but they managed to stem one. At three-quarter time, 9-8-62 led 7-8-50, and the final scoreline saw Melbourne win 15-10-100 to 11-11-77. After quarter time, Carlton went on to kick 5 goals 9. Melbourne went on to kick 15 goals 4. No, 9 after quarter time. 15 goals 9. That is insane. Absolutely insane. And it was on the back of certain players standing tall. Cozzy Pickett had one of the worst opening quarters, and at halftime, the commentary team was putting him on notice. And that second half, I don't think Melbourne win this game if it's not for Cozzy Pickett. This was a game where at halftime, dead in the water, but I feel what would have happened is, and the commentary team were highlighting this as well, Stephen King would have gone in at halftime saying, boys, we've played terrible, but Carlton have faded out in every single game so far this year in the second half, so this is very winnable. And so much so that Dale Thomas, who played for Carlton, at halftime turned around and said, don't write Melbourne off because we know what happens. And everyone laughed at him. Then heading into the last quarter, with them trailing by 12 points, he turned around and said he will back in the team that kicks the first goal in that last term to win the game. And Melbourne kicked one, I think, within the first minute. Melbourne go on to win. Again, questions to be had. I think it's time Carlton pulled the trigger. Michael Voss needs to go. It's not just this year. 18 months of football where they have been insipid in second halves, which have cost them playing in finals, which has cost them winning games. Let's be real. Got absolutely flogged by Sydney in the opening round. In round 1, were lucky to beat Richmond, and then they have just coughed up a 10-goal turnaround here in this game. Should that not be enough to fucking convince the Carlton board it's time to move Voss on? Injury-wise, Giath did a calf and sat out the second half for Melbourne. Williams did a rib injury, and Dean ended up suffering a side hip injury late, which is terrible because I feel Dean has been a shining light for Carlton in their defensive structure. He takes the game on. He's got a very smart head on him. But again, this was such a fucking turnaround in the last half, especially in the last term. Looking at the team stats, this will be interesting because this is a game that I didn't get to physically see. I heard it on the radio from start to finish. So looking at the team stats here, it's going to be the first time I see the breakdown. Disposals, only 7 the way of Melbourne. Inside 50s, they had 13 more at the end of the day, and they capitalized. Well, inside efficiency, they actually had less efficiency inside 50, but just managed to make most of more use. I mean, they monstered hit-outs here, 68 to 26, but the clearance game was only split by 2. Contested possessions was only split by 5 the way of Carlton. Uncontested was only 4 the way of Melbourne. They had equal pretty much amount of marks around the ground. Tackles, Melbourne laid almost 30 more for the game. Apart from the hit-outs being one-sided, everything was incredibly even. So it just came down to who wanted to take opportunity most, who wanted to step up when the game was on the line. We can call out as many players as we want that didn't step up. I mean, in this game, Bailey Fritsch went unsighted in that first half, essentially, and fucking Dale Thomas comes out on the radio and says, Bailey Fritsch is the type of player who can end up kicking 4 goals and getting Melbourne back into this game, and he kicked 4 goals. It's just, young kids stood up in this game. I mean, I thought Harvey Langford was incredible. Cade Chandler, Tom Sparrow, Harry Sharp, Paddy Cross comes in for his game, for his first game. He only has 6 touches, but he goes out there and kicks his first goal and contributes in the win. You know, Caleb Windsor had 24. It was an effort where it wasn't on the back of senior players. It was young kids really standing tall, which as a rebuilding Melbourne team that is missing Christian Petrarca, that is missing Clayton Oliver, that is, you know, exposing kids to the game a little bit more. Incredible to see that they've taken the reins. Outside of that, looking at the players, you know, the better players, Sam Walsh was probably Carlton's best. Outside of maybe Ollie Hollins, who in defence was good. Paddy Cripps was serviceable. Jagger Smith had a great game. But then you look at the highest rated players and it's all Melbourne, and deservingly so. I mean, when the game was there to be won, Carlton faded into obscurity and Melbourne ran away with it. The funniest takeaway from this, I feel, which is why I think they need to direct attention at Michael Voss needing to lose this role, is 2 weeks ago against Richmond, he comes out and says there's no inability to close out games. They're perfectly fine. And this week has turned around and said that his leadership group is poor and that they need to reassess their inability to run out games because it's something they need to work on. You can't backflip on comments like that as easily as he did. It's, again, very much the same position as Brad Scott, and I feel the race is on. Brad Scott, Michael Voss, who loses their job first? I think it's that easy, and I do feel Michael Voss, the conversation needs to be had. I mean, if Carlton were smart, they would have already had the conversation by the point of this recording, which hasn't been the case. I don't know whether they stick it out for the year and then they sack him, but they're not moving forward with Voss at the helm. They should very well be at this point in time 0-3, which is unreal considering they were in the game against Sydney until halftime. They were lucky to defeat Richmond, and they've been blown out by a 10-goal turnaround here. It's, I don't understand what's going on with Carlton. I really don't. They've fumbled severely over the last 18 to 24 months. The 3 votes here I've given to Melbourne convincingly. The 1 vote I gave to Jack Steele. 23 disposals, 10 were contested, 5 marks, 16 tackles, 4 clearances, 386 metres gained, and 4 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Max Gawn. Huge around the contest. 23 disposals, 13 were contested, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 58 hit-outs, 6 clearances, 362 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. And best on ground, as I said, without this man turning his game around at half-time, Melbourne don't win. Cozzy Pickett, 33 disposals, 11 contested, 7 marks, 4 tackles, 6 clearances, 834 metres gained, 1 goal, 3 goal assists, 10 score involvements, was absolutely huge. Will Melbourne play finals this year? I still don't think they will, but this is a huge win for them. Not just for momentum, but to see a great of the game, one of the best to ever play out of their club, Max Gawn, walk away with a win, I think is just huge for respect towards somebody of his caliber. Carlton are going to have something severely need to change, otherwise they're not even in contention for a wildcard spot. They're in no man's land beyond anything that can be, comprehended. I feel they need to look hard at some players that aren't delivering. The Carlton supporters are calling for people to get dropped. Some people are saying Patrick Cripps shouldn't be playing next week. It's fucking rough. It is bad. Let's keep a close eye on this, because something's got to change, because I'm lost for words. I don't even know. With all the votes tallied up for another round, this is how the leaderboard is currently looking after round 3. In third place, equally on 5 votes, we have Geelong's Max Holmes and North Melbourne's Tristan Cherry. In second place, equally on 6 votes, we have Gold Coast's Christian Petrarca, Western Bulldogs' Marcus Bontempelli, Port Adelaide's Zach Butters, and North Melbourne's Harry Sheasel. And in first place, definitively out in front on 8 votes, is Collingwood's Nick Dacos. More importantly, after 3 rounds, this is how the ladder is looking, and we have a lot of teams separated by percentage, which again, that's why I'm saying percentage is a big thing this year. Equally first and second, separated by 1 win and still undefeated, having sat on the bye. Gold Coast in first and Western Bulldogs in second on 12 points respectively. From 3rd to 10th, every single team has won 2 games, all separated by percentage. In 3rd, we have Fremantle. In 4th, we have Sydney. In 5th, we have Hawthorn. And in 6th, we have North Melbourne. And then within our wildcard 7 to 10 configuration, we have Collingwood in 7th, Melbourne in 8th, West Coast Eagles in 9th, and Geelong in 10th. Following that, 11 to 16 have all won 1 game, all separated on percentage. In 11th, we have Port Adelaide. 12th, we have Adelaide. 13th, we have Brisbane. 14th, we have St Kilda. 15th, we have GWS. 16th, we have Carlton. And the 2 teams yet to win a game are 17th placed Essendon and 18th placed Richmond. With all that out of the way, there is only one thing to do before the round can be recapped, and that is to announce my team of the week. And this is where I landed for round 3. In defence, I have Josh Worrell and Lockie Whitfield in the back pockets, and Jake Lever at full back, with Josh Dacos and Luke Parker on the half-back flanks, and Tom Stewart at centre-half back. My centre line has Max Holmes and Harry Sheasel on the wings, and Bailey Smith in the centre, with Max Gawn as this week's vice-captain in the ruck, Nick Dacos as this week's captain at Ruck Rover, and Caleb Sarong at Ruck Rover. My forward line has Shea Bolton and Keziah Pickett on the half-forward flanks, and Tim Membry at centre-half forward, with Bailey Fritsch and Jake Waterman in the forward pockets, and Josh Tracy at full forward. My interchange consists of Harley Reid, Zach Butters, Will Ashcroft, Jared Berry, and Tim Kelly. My coach of the week is Andrew McQualter, and the assistant coach of the week is Stephen King. With all that out of the way, the round is officially recapped. I do want to thank you all for joining me for another installment. If you did enjoy it, I would appreciate you hitting that like button down below. It goes a long way to telling YouTube something right is happening around here. Plenty to talk about, so I'd love to know your opinions and discussion points in the comment section down below, as well as any suggestions that you have for potential content you would like to see. You can either comment that down below or check me out on social media, which links can be found in the description. And last but certainly not least, if you want to get on board the community we are building together here, hit that subscribe button as well. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.